The satisfaction of a quiet Saturday morning shattered when a woman in a beige suit marched across the parking lot, pointing her finger like a weapon. "That car isn't yours!" she screamed at the woman in the red dress. But the teacher, standing by that black sedan, had a truth that would bring the millionaire to her knees in front of everyone watching. The summer heat pressed down on the Riverside Mall parking lot like a heavy blanket. Eleanor Mitchell turned off the engine of her black sedan and sat still for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. At 62 years old, she had learned to appreciate small moments of peace before stepping into the chaos of crowded places. She glanced at the car's dashboard, running her fingers across the smooth surface. This vehicle still felt like a dream to her, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. 3,214 people had contributed to buy it for her. Former students, parents, neighbors, strangers who had heard her story. Some gave hundreds of dollars, others gave whatever coins they could spare. An elderly woman from her church had pressed a crumpled $5 bill into her hand and said it was all she had that month. Eleanor had wept for hours that day. 35 years of teaching in one of Detroit's most challenging schools. 35 years of arriving before sunrise and leaving after dark. 35 years of buying supplies with her own money, of visiting homes on weekends to convince parents not to let their children drop out, of holding crying teenagers who had nowhere else to turn. And at the end of it all, when she thought retirement would mean loneliness and forgotten purpose, her community had wrapped its arms around her in the most beautiful way possible. She adjusted her red dress, the one she had bought specifically for today. It was her grandson's 10th birthday, and she had promised him they would spend the entire day together. He could choose any store, any restaurant, any activity. Today was about him. "Grandma, are we going in?" The voice came from the back seat. Marcus sat with his noise-cancelling headphones around his neck, his dark eyes scanning the parking lot with careful attention. At 10 years old, he had already learned to assess environments before entering them. Too many sounds, too many lights, too many people moving in unpredictable patterns. Any of these could overwhelm his sensitive nervous system. "Yes, sweetheart." "How are you feeling?" Scale of 1 to 10. 4 right now. The parking lot is okay, not too loud. Eleanor smiled. They had developed this system together over the years. Anything below 5 meant Marcus was comfortable. Above 7 meant they needed to find a quiet space immediately. It was their secret language, their way of navigating a world that wasn't designed for children like him. She stepped out of the car and walked around to help Marcus. He took her hand immediately, his small fingers gripping hers with practiced trust. His other hand held a worn notebook filled with drawings. Marcus saw the world differently than most people. He noticed patterns others missed, heard frequencies others couldn't detect, felt textures others never considered. His doctors called it sensory processing disorder. Eleanor simply called it his gift. "Remember our plan?" she asked softly. "If it gets too much, I squeeze your hand 3 times and we find somewhere quiet. That's my boy." They had barely taken 10 steps toward the mall entrance when Eleanor heard it. The sharp click of expensive heels against asphalt, rapid, angry, coming directly toward them. "Excuse me, you there, stop right now." Eleanor turned slowly, instinctively positioning Marcus behind her. A woman was marching across the parking lot with the fury of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. She appeared to be in her late 50s, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her beige suit probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly pension. A gold watch glinted on her wrist, and her manicured nails were painted a deep crimson that matched the rage in her eyes. "Can I help you?" Eleanor kept her voice calm. Decades of dealing with upset parents had taught her that serenity was the best response to hostility. The woman stopped less than 3 feet away, her chest heaving with exertion and anger. Her perfume was overwhelming, expensive, suffocating. "I saw you get out of that car." She pointed at Eleanor's sedan with an accusatory finger. "That exact car belonged to my son who passed away 3 years ago, so you're going to explain to me right now how you got your hands on it." Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat, not because of the accusation, but because of what the woman had just revealed. She knew exactly who this was now. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Don't you dare!" The woman's voice rose several octaves. Around them, people were beginning to stop and stare. A young couple with shopping bags, a security guard reaching for his radio, 3 teenagers with their phones already raised, recording everything, an elderly man shaking his head in disapproval. "I know what I saw." That car has the same scratch on the rear bumper, the same dent on the passenger door. It's James's car. My James. Eleanor felt Marcus squeeze her hand. Once. His signal that the noise was starting to bother him. This is not your son's car, Eleanor said firmly but quietly. This car was a gift from my community. Over 3,000 people contributed to purchase it for me when I retired from teaching. Oh, please. The woman let out a harsh laugh. People like you don't get gifts like that. What did you really do? Did you steal it? Did you con someone? The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. People like you. She had heard variations of that phrase her entire life. At job interviews, at parent-teacher conferences, at stores where employees followed her down aisles. But she had never let it break her, and she wouldn't start now. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, she said, her voice steady as stone. I taught at Morrison Elementary School for 35 years. I've helped raise thousands of children in this city, and I don't owe you an explanation for anything I own. The woman's eyes narrowed. Mitchell? Why does that name sound familiar? Marcus squeezed Eleanor's hand again. Twice now. She needed to end this quickly. Perhaps because your son married my daughter. The color drained from the woman's face so quickly that Eleanor thought she might faint right there in the parking lot. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. You're Rachel's mother? I am. And this? Eleanor gently pulled Marcus forward, keeping her hand firmly wrapped around his. Is Marcus, your grandson. The one you abandoned the moment you learned he was different from what you expected. The crowd around them had grown. Eleanor could hear the whispers now, see the phones recording from every angle. The security guard was speaking urgently into his radio, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the little boy trembling beside her, and the woman standing frozen in front of her. I didn't know, the woman stammered. You didn't know what, Mrs. Ashford? That your grandson existed? That your son died in that accident alongside my daughter? That a little boy was left orphaned while you were too busy counting your money to attend the funeral? Victoria Ashford, because that's who she was, Eleanor now realized fully, stumbled backward as if she'd been struck. That's not fair. I had my reasons. Reasons? Eleanor's voice remained low, but it carried the weight of 3 years of anger. 3 years of single-handedly raising a child who needed more support than most. 3 years of explaining to Marcus why his other grandmother never called, never visited, never sent so much as a birthday card. You want to talk about reasons, Mrs. Ashford? Let me tell you about reasons. When Marcus was diagnosed, your son James called you crying. He wanted his mother's support. Do you know what you told him? Victoria's silence was answer enough. You told him it must be genetic from that side of the family. You told him he made a mistake marrying Rachel. You told him, and these were your exact words according to James, that you couldn't be associated with a child who would embarrass the Ashford name. Marcus was squeezing Eleanor's hand continuously now. 3 times. The distress signal, the noise, the tension, the emotional charge in the air. It was all becoming too much for him. Eleanor knelt down immediately, turning her back on Victoria without hesitation. I'm here, sweetheart. Grandma's right here. Let's breathe together, okay? In through your nose and hold it. Out through your mouth, and that's perfect. Keep going. She pulled his headphones up over his ears, creating a barrier against the chaos. Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, on the familiar rhythm they had practiced hundreds of times. Behind her, Eleanor heard Victoria's voice crack. Is something wrong with him? Eleanor stood slowly, keeping Marcus close to her side. Something wrong with him? She let the question hang in the air. No, Mrs. Ashford. There is nothing wrong with my grandson. He experiences the world differently than you do, more intensely, more deeply. Where you see noise, he hears every individual sound layered on top of each other. Where you feel a mild breeze, he feels every molecule of air moving across his skin. She paused, watching Victoria's face contort with emotions she couldn't quite read. Marcus is not broken. He's not a burden. He's not an embarrassment. He is the most extraordinary child I have ever known, and the tragedy isn't that he has sensory processing disorder. The tragedy is that you missed 3 years of getting to know him because you were too afraid of what other people might think. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone nearby said, "She really abandoned her own grandson?" Another voice responded, "That's cold even for a rich woman." Victoria's facade was crumbling visibly now. Her perfectly composed face was streaked with tears, her expensive mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I lost my son. I lost James, and I couldn't— You lost James? Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more power than any shout. I lost my daughter, my only child, my Rachel, who I raised alone after my husband passed. My Rachel, who became a teacher just like me, who believed in making the world better one child at a time. And I lost my son-in-law too, your James, who loved my daughter more than anything in this world, except for that little boy standing right there. She pointed at Marcus, who was slowly calming down, his eyes still closed, his breathing becoming more regular. But I didn't run away. I didn't hide behind my grief. I picked up the pieces and I raised my grandson. I learned everything I could about his condition. I went to therapy sessions and doctor's appointments and school meetings. I held him through every meltdown, celebrated every breakthrough, fought every system that tried to tell me he was less than perfect. Eleanor straightened her spine, all 5 feet 6 inches of her radiating a dignity that no amount of money could ever buy. So don't you dare stand here and talk to me about loss, Mrs. Ashford. Don't you dare accuse me of stealing when the only thief here is you, someone who stole 3 years from a child who deserved to know his grandmother. Victoria was sobbing now, ugly, ragged sobs that shook her entire body. But Eleanor felt no sympathy. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Grandma? Marcus's small voice cut through the tension. He had removed one side of his headphones and was looking at Victoria with curious eyes. Why is she crying? Eleanor knelt beside him again. She's sad, sweetheart. Sometimes people make choices that hurt others and then they realize what they've done, and it makes them cry. Marcus considered this for a moment. Then, in the straightforward way that only children possess, he said, My daddy told me she was my other grandma, before he went to live in the sky with Mommy. Victoria made a sound that was half gasp, half wail. He said she was sick, Marcus continued. Not sick like me when sounds hurt. A different kind of sick. He said maybe one day she would get better and come find me. Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes now. She hadn't known James had told Marcus about Victoria, hadn't known he'd tried to explain his mother's absence in the kindest way possible. Victoria fell to her knees on the hot asphalt, her expensive suit forgotten, her carefully constructed image shattered. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to— I couldn't face. This isn't the place for this conversation. Eleanor's voice was firm but no longer cold. My grandson's birthday is not going to be ruined by a scene in a parking lot. She took Marcus's hand and began to walk away. Wait! Victoria scrambled to her feet. Please, I want to— Eleanor turned one last time. If you truly want to be part of Marcus's life, Mrs. Ashford, it won't happen through lawyers or demands or accusations in parking lots. It will happen through humility, through showing up, through proving day after day that you can be trusted with his heart. She handed Victoria a small card from her purse. Simple, just her name and phone number. When you're ready to be a grandmother and not a victim, you can call me. Until then, I have a birthday to celebrate. As Eleanor and Marcus walked toward the mall entrance, she heard Victoria's voice one final time, broken and desperate. This isn't over. I won't let it be over. But what Victoria didn't know was that her son James had left something behind. A letter written months before the accident addressed to the mother who had broken his heart. A letter that would change everything Victoria thought she knew about herself, about her son, and about the possibility of redemption, because some truths don't stay buried forever. And the truth about Victoria Ashford was about to come to light. Eleanor managed to keep her composure until they reached the toy store on the 3rd floor. Marcus ran toward the shelves of building sets with his eyes wide, momentarily forgetting the chaos they had just escaped. Only then did she allow herself to lean against a display case and breathe. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of memories that Victoria Ashford had dragged to the surface. Memories she had carefully packed away in boxes labeled, "Do not open." Memories that now spilled across the floor of her mind like shattered glass. She watched Marcus examine each building, set with scientific precision, counting pieces, comparing colors, analyzing the complexity of each design. He would take at least 20 minutes to make his decision. He always did, and Eleanor was grateful for that time because she needed every second to steady herself. Victoria Ashford. After 3 years of silence, that woman had appeared like a ghost from a past Eleanor had tried so hard to bury, and the worst part wasn't the accusation about the car. The worst part was seeing Rachel's husband's mother and being reminded, with brutal clarity, of everything she had lost. Eleanor closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. 38 years ago, she was just a 24-year-old woman with a teaching degree and a heart full of impossible dreams. Everyone told her she was making a mistake when she accepted the position at Morrison Elementary School in one of Detroit's most forgotten neighborhoods. The salary was barely enough to cover rent. The building was falling apart. The children came from homes where hope was a luxury no one could afford, but Eleanor saw something different. She saw potential wrapped in poverty. She saw brilliance hiding behind hunger. She saw futures waiting to be written by someone who believed they were possible. Her first classroom had 32 students and 26 desks. She spent her first paycheck buying the missing furniture from a second-hand store. Her second paycheck went to notebooks and pencils for children whose parents couldn't afford supplies. By her third month, she was spending more on her students than on herself, eating rice and beans for dinner so that her kids could have the tools they needed to learn. The other teachers called her naive. The principal warned her about burnout. Her own mother begged her to find a better job, something that paid enough to build a real life. But Eleanor couldn't leave. Every morning, when she walked into that crumbling building and saw 32 faces looking at her with a mixture of hope and hunger, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. William found her crying in the school parking lot one evening during her second year. She had just lost a student, Deshaun Williams, a brilliant 12-year-old who had been caught in crossfire on his way home from basketball practice. Eleanor had spent hours at the hospital, holding his mother's hand, watching machines beep until they didn't anymore. William was a mechanic who worked at the garage across the street. He had seen her arrive every morning before dawn and leave every night after dark. He had watched her carry boxes of supplies from her car, organize fundraisers on weekends, visit students' homes on her days off. He had fallen in love with her dedication before he ever spoke a word to her. That night, he sat beside her on the cold concrete and said nothing, just handed her a cup of coffee from the thermos he always carried and waited until her tears ran dry. They were married 14 months later. William never made much money, but he made Eleanor feel like the richest woman in the world. He fixed things, cars, appliances, broken furniture, broken spirits. When Eleanor came home defeated after losing another student to the streets, William would hold her and whisper, "You can't save them all, baby, but the ones you do save, they'll change the world." He believed in her mission as fiercely as she did. He spent weekends building bookshelves for her classroom. He taught her students basic car maintenance so they could have marketable skills. He became Mr. William to hundreds of children who had never seen a man show up consistently for anything. Rachel was born on a Tuesday morning in spring, and Eleanor swore the sun shone brighter that day than it ever had before. She was a perfect blend of both parents, William's patient eyes and Eleanor's stubborn chin. From the moment she could walk, Rachel followed Eleanor around the house, pretending to grade papers with crayons, correcting imaginary students with a stern voice that made both parents laugh until they cried. "She's going to be a teacher," William said one night, watching 5-year-old Rachel line up her dolls for a spelling test. "Just like her mama." "Heaven help us," Eleanor replied, but she was smiling. The years that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. Rachel grew into a compassionate young woman who inherited her mother's fire and her father's gentleness. She graduated top of her class, earned a full scholarship to university, and announced on her 22nd birthday that she had been accepted into the teaching program. William cried. Eleanor pretended not to, but happiness, Eleanor learned, was never permanent. It was borrowed time, golden moments stolen from a universe that always demanded them back. William's heart gave out on a Wednesday afternoon. He was 51 years old underneath a car at the garage, doing what he had done for 30 years. One moment he was alive, and the next he simply wasn't. No warning, no goodbye, just silence where his laugh used to be. Eleanor thought she would die too, wanted to some days. The house was too quiet, the bed too empty, the future too lonely to contemplate. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring whether she lived or not. It was her students who saved her. They showed up at her door one by one with casseroles and cards and stories about how Mr. William had changed their lives. Young men and women she had taught years ago, now adults with families of their own, came to tell her that she couldn't give up, that they needed her, that the children still sitting in her classroom needed her. So Eleanor did what she had always done. She showed up. Day after day, year after year, she showed up, not because the grief was gone, but because love was stronger than loss. Because William would have wanted her to keep fighting. Because somewhere in that crumbling school building, there was always another child who needed someone to believe in them. Rachel became her anchor during those dark years. She had graduated by then and was teaching at a middle school across town. Mother and daughter would meet for dinner every Sunday, sharing stories about their students, their triumphs, their heartbreaks. Rachel understood the life in a way no one else could, because she had chosen it too. And then Rachel met James Ashford. Eleanor remembered the first time her daughter mentioned him. They were at their usual Sunday dinner, and Rachel's eyes had a sparkle that Eleanor hadn't seen since William's funeral. "He's different, Mum. He comes from money, but he doesn't act like it. He's working with this non-profit that builds affordable housing. He actually cares about making things better." Eleanor was skeptical. She had seen too many rich boys play at philanthropy before returning to their comfortable lives, but she agreed to meet him, for Rachel's sake. James arrived at Eleanor's small house with flowers for her and a toolbox for himself. He had heard about the leaky faucet in her kitchen and insisted on fixing it before dinner. He spent 2 hours under her sink, refusing any help, emerging covered in rust stains and wearing the biggest smile she had ever seen on a grown man. "Your daughter is the most amazing person I've ever met," he told Eleanor over meatloaf that evening. "I know I'm not from your world. I know my family has more money than sense, but I love Rachel with everything I have. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of her." Eleanor saw William in that moment, not in James's face or voice, but in his spirit, in the way he looked at Rachel like she was the only star in his sky, in the way he talked about building things, fixing things, making the world a little less broken. "Fix people the way you fix faucets," Eleanor told him, "and we'll get along just fine." The wedding was small and beautiful, held in Eleanor's backyard, with fairy lights strung through the old oak tree where William used to read his newspaper. James's family was notably absent. His mother, Victoria, had made her disapproval clear from the beginning. She had called Rachel common and Eleanor inappropriate. She had threatened to cut James off financially if he went through with the marriage. James married Rachel anyway, and he never looked back. For 3 years, they built a life together. James left his family's company to work full-time with the non-profit. Rachel continued teaching, pouring her heart into children the same way Eleanor had. They bought a small house not far from Eleanor's, close enough for Sunday dinners to continue, close enough for Eleanor to watch her daughter bloom into the woman she had always known she could be. When Rachel announced her pregnancy, Eleanor felt William's presence so strongly she could almost hear his laugh. A grandchild, a new generation to love and teach and watch grow. Marcus arrived on a snowy December morning, small and perfect and impossibly beautiful. Eleanor held him in the hospital room while Rachel slept, whispering promises into his tiny ears. She would teach him everything she knew. She would protect him from everything she could. She would love him with a fierceness that transcended time and death and every obstacle the world could throw at them. The first 2 years were magical. Marcus hit every milestone on schedule. He crawled, walked, spoke his first words right when the book said he should. He was a happy baby, always laughing, always curious, always reaching for the world with both hands. But then things began to change. Marcus started covering his ears at sounds that didn't bother anyone else. He would scream during bath time, clawing at his skin as if the water burned. He stopped making eye contact, retreating into himself whenever there were too many people around. Birthday parties became nightmares. Grocery stores became battlegrounds. The happy, curious baby was disappearing, replaced by a child who seemed trapped in a world of invisible pain. The diagnosis came when Marcus was 3. Sensory processing disorder. His brain received sensory information differently than most people. Sounds were louder, lights were brighter, textures were more intense. The world that most people navigated easily was, for Marcus, an overwhelming assault on his nervous system. Eleanor watched Rachel and James receive the news with a mixture of heartbreak and determination. This wasn't the future they had imagined, but they would face it together. They would learn everything they could. They would give Marcus every tool he needed to thrive. James called his mother that night. Eleanor was there when he made the call, hope and fear battling in his eyes. Surely now, faced with her grandson's diagnosis, Victoria would soften. Surely now she would want to be part of their lives. She heard James's side of the conversation, the way his voice started hopeful and ended hollow. The way he said, "I understand," when clearly he didn't. The way he hung up the phone and sat in silence for a full minute before turning to Rachel with tears streaming down his face. "She said it's genetic. From your side. She said she can't be associated with—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Victoria Ashford had chosen her reputation over her grandson, and James, heartbroken but resolute, never called her again. The next 4 years were a beautiful struggle. Marcus learned to navigate his world with the help of therapy, patience, and more love than any child had ever received. He developed his own communication systems, his own coping mechanisms, his own unique way of experiencing life. He wasn't broken. He was different. And different, Eleanor reminded him every single day, was a gift. Then came the accident, a rainy night, a truck that ran a red light. 2 lives ended in an instant. Eleanor received the call at 11:14 in the evening. She remembered the exact time because she had been grading papers. Old habits never truly die. When the phone rang with news that would destroy her world. Rachel and James were gone. Just like that. Just like William. And Marcus, 7 years old and already carrying more weight than any child should, was now an orphan. Victoria didn't come to the funeral, didn't call, didn't send so much as a card. But Eleanor showed up. The way she had always shown up. The way William had taught her, and Rachel had learned, and James had embodied. She took Marcus home that night and held him while he screamed. She held him through the days when he couldn't eat and the nights when he couldn't sleep. She held him when he asked why everyone kept leaving, and she had no answers that made sense. And 3 months later, when her former students heard what had happened, they organized the fundraiser that would change her life. "Grandma!" Marcus's voice pulled Eleanor back to the present. She opened her eyes to find him standing in front of her, holding a building set with precisely 847 pieces. She knew he had counted them all. "This one," he said. "It builds a whole city. I can make houses for everyone." Eleanor smiled, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then let's get it, sweetheart. Let's build a whole city together." As they walked toward the register, Eleanor's phone buzzed in her purse. A text message from an unknown number. "Please, I need to explain. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me a chance. My son left me a letter. I need to show you what it says." Eleanor stared at the message for a long moment. Then she put the phone away and focused on what mattered. The extraordinary boy beside her, and the birthday they still had to celebrate. Victoria Ashford's letter could wait, but it wouldn't wait for long, because somewhere across the city, a broken woman was reading words her dead son had written, and those words were about to change everything. Victoria Ashford woke up on Monday morning to the sound of her phone vibrating against the marble nightstand. She reached for it with eyes still closed, expecting the usual morning briefing from her assistant. Instead, she found 342 missed calls and over 2,000 unread messages. Her blood turned to ice. She sat up in the silk sheets of her penthouse bedroom, the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Detroit skyline. For 40 years, this view had represented everything she had achieved. The buildings below, the cars moving like ants, the people rushing to jobs that would never pay them what she earned in an hour. She had climbed to the top of this city, and she had done it alone. But as she opened the first notification, Victoria realized that the empire she had spent a lifetime building was crumbling beneath her feet. "Millionaire grandmother abandons special needs grandson. Video goes viral." The headline hit her like a physical blow. She clicked on the link with trembling fingers, and there it was. The parking lot confrontation, filmed from at least 6 different angles, edited together into a devastating narrative. 18 million views in less than 48 hours. The comments section was an endless scroll of hatred. "This woman is everything wrong with the wealthy elite. She abandoned her own grandson because he's different. Monster. The teacher showed more class in 5 minutes than this millionaire has shown in her entire life. Imagine having all that money and zero humanity." Victoria threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, but the notifications kept coming. She could hear them buzzing from across the bedroom, each vibration another nail in her coffin. The landline rang. She ignored it. It rang again. And again. Finally she picked up. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Patricia from the office." Her assistant's voice was strained, professional, terrified. "The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. They're discussing your position as chairwoman." Victoria's throat tightened. "On what grounds?" reputational damage to the company. The Ashford Development Group has received over 3,000 complaint emails since yesterday. Several major clients have threatened to pull their contracts. The stock dropped 11% at opening bell. 11%. Millions of dollars evaporated because of a 3-minute video in a parking lot. "I'll be there," Victoria said, and hung up before Patricia could respond. She walked to the bathroom on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, mascara smeared from crying in her sleep, hair disheveled, eyes hollow with exhaustion, and something deeper, something that looked terrifyingly like shame. Victoria gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection. How had it come to this? She had spent 60 years building walls around herself, walls made of money, status, reputation, control, walls that kept the world at a safe distance, where no one could hurt her, where no one could see the terrified little girl still hiding inside. But Eleanor Mitchell had torn those walls down with nothing but truth. And now the whole world could see what Victoria had been hiding all along, a woman so broken that she couldn't love her own grandson. The memories came then, unbidden and unwelcome. Memories she had buried so deep she sometimes forgot they existed. Victoria was born into wealth, but wealth had not protected her from pain. Her father, Richard Ashford Sr., was a titan of industry who built shopping centers across the Midwest. He was also a man who believed that children should be seen and not heard, that emotions were weakness, and that love was a transaction to be negotiated, not given freely. Her mother, Eugenia, was worse. Eugenia Ashford had been a beauty queen before marrying into money, and she treated motherhood like an inconvenience that interrupted her social calendar. Victoria's earliest memories were of nannies, a rotating cast of women who came and went because Eugenia fired anyone who got too close to her daughter. "Don't get attached," Eugenia would say whenever Victoria cried over a departing caregiver. "Attachment is weakness. The moment you need someone, you give them power over you. Never give anyone that power." Victoria learned the lesson well. She learned to smile without feeling, to perform affection without experiencing it, to keep everyone at arm's length, including the baby boy who arrived when she was 23 and terrified. James was perfect, perfect and terrifying. Victoria held him in the hospital, this tiny creature who depended on her completely, and felt nothing but fear. Fear that she would break him, fear that she would fail him, fear that if she let herself love him, that love would destroy her the way her own mother's absence had destroyed something fundamental inside her. So she did what Eugenia had done. She hired nannies. She maintained distance. She provided everything money could buy, and nothing that money couldn't. James grew up in a mansion full of toys and empty of warmth. He had the best schools, the finest clothes, the most expensive vacations. He had everything except a mother who knew how to hold him when he cried. And still, impossibly, he turned out good. That was the part Victoria could never understand. Despite everything she had done wrong, despite every wall she had built between them, James grew into a kind and compassionate man. He saw homeless people on the street and gave them his lunch money. He tutored struggling students for free. He chose to work with non-profits instead of joining the family business. He was everything Victoria wasn't, and she had no idea how it happened. When James brought Rachel home, Victoria felt threatened in ways she couldn't articulate. This woman with her bright eyes and easy laugh, this teacher from a poor neighborhood who looked at James like he hung the moon. She was everything Victoria had taught herself to despise, everything that reminded her of the warmth she had never been able to feel. So Victoria did what she always did. She attacked. She called Rachel common. She called Eleanor inappropriate. She threatened to cut James off if he married beneath his station. James married Rachel anyway, and Victoria told herself it didn't hurt when he stopped calling, told herself it was his loss, told herself that she didn't need a son who chose love over loyalty. She almost believed it. Then came the phone call about Marcus's diagnosis. Victoria was at a charity gala when James called, surrounded by people in designer gowns and tailored suits, champagne flowing like water. She stepped onto a balcony to take the call, expecting news about the baby's first steps or first words. Instead, she heard her son crying. "Mom, Marcus has been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. He's going to need extra support, but the doctors say with the right help he can have a wonderful life. I need you, Mom. I need to know you're going to be there for him. For us." Victoria stood on that balcony, looking out at the city lights. and felt the walls inside her tremble. Her grandson was different. Her grandson would need extra care, extra patience, extra love. Her grandson would require her to be the kind of mother, the kind of grandmother she had never learned how to be. The fear was overwhelming. This must be genetic, she heard herself say, as if from a great distance. From her side of the family. The Ashfords have never had issues like this. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Victoria counted each one. "Goodbye, Mom," James said. And the line went dead. He never called again. Victoria told herself it was for the best, told herself that she wasn't equipped for a child with special needs, told herself that Marcus would be better off without a grandmother who didn't know how to love properly. 3 years later, James was dead, and Victoria had never gotten the chance to take back those terrible words. The board meeting was a disaster. Victoria sat at the head of the table she had commanded for 15 years, surrounded by men and women she had hired, trained and, in many cases, intimidated into submission. Now they looked at her with something she had never seen before, pity mixed with contempt. "The shareholders are demanding action," the CFO said, not meeting her eyes. "The video has been shared over 50 million times across all platforms. Our brand is being associated with abandonment, with cruelty. We're receiving calls from advocacy groups threatening boycotts." "I built this company," Victoria said, her voice steady, even as her hands shook beneath the table. "I turned a regional development firm into a national powerhouse. I have given 40 years of my life to—" "And we're grateful for your service," the board chairman interrupted. The word service hit Victoria like a slap, as if she were an employee, as if she were disposable. "But the board has voted to accept your resignation, effective immediately. You'll retain your shares, of course, but your position as chairwoman is no longer tenable." Victoria looked around the table at faces she had known for decades. Not one of them would meet her gaze. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out without another word. The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor took exactly 93 seconds. Victoria counted each one, just as she had counted the seconds of silence before James said goodbye for the last time. When she got home, the penthouse felt different, larger somehow and emptier. The artwork on the walls, collected over decades from galleries around the world, looked garish and meaningless. The furniture, custom designed by artisans in Italy, felt cold and unwelcoming. This was her life. This was what she had built. A beautiful prison filled with beautiful things that meant nothing to anyone. Victoria poured herself a drink and sat by the window, watching the sun set over a city that had just watched her fall from grace. The alcohol burned her throat, but did nothing to warm the ice in her chest. Her phone buzzed. Another notification. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Marina Santos. I was James's assistant for 8 years. There's something you need to see. James left a letter for you before he died. He asked me to deliver it if anything ever happened to him. I think it's time." Victoria stared at the message until her vision blurred. A letter. James had left her a letter. For 3 years, this letter had existed somewhere in the world, waiting for her. For 3 years, she could have had her son's final words, and she hadn't known. She typed back with trembling fingers, "When can you bring it?" The response came immediately, "I'm in your lobby." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat on her cold Italian sofa, holding an envelope with her name written in James's handwriting. Marina had left without saying much, just handed over the envelope and looked at Victoria with an expression that might have been compassion or might have been judgment. Victoria didn't care which. She held the envelope for a long time, afraid to open it, afraid of what James might say, afraid that his final words would confirm what she already suspected, that she had been a terrible mother and deserved every bit of pain she was feeling now. Finally, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, she opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. "Mum," the letter began, and Victoria was already crying. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. And before I left, I needed you to know the truth about the day I stopped calling you. It wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I finally understood why you never learned how to love me back. I spent years being angry at you, Mum. Years wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough, why you always kept me at arm's length. I thought it was my fault. I thought if I was smarter, more successful, more like the son you wanted, maybe you would finally hold me the way other mothers held their children. But then Marcus was born, and everything changed. The moment I held my son for the first time, I understood something I never had before. Love isn't something you choose, it's something that happens to you, whether you're ready or not. It floods into your heart and takes up residence, and suddenly this tiny person becomes the center of your entire universe. I felt that flood, Mom. I felt it overwhelm me and terrify me and fill me with a joy I had never known existed. And in that moment, I finally understood why you couldn't feel it for me, because someone taught you not to. I don't know what Grandmother Eugenia did to you when you were young. You never talked about your childhood, and I never asked. But I know that kind of coldness doesn't come from nowhere. I know that walls like yours aren't built by choice. They're built by pain, brick by brick, until the person inside can't find their way out anymore. You're trapped, Mom. You've been trapped your whole life, and the tragedy isn't what you did to me. The tragedy is what was done to you. When you said those words about Marcus, about his diagnosis being genetic, about him embarrassing the Ashford name, I knew you weren't really talking about him. You were talking about yourself. You were terrified that if you let yourself love him, you'd have to admit that you had always been capable of love, and that would mean facing every moment you chose not to love me. I forgive you. I forgive you for the nannies instead of hugs, for the money instead of time, for the distance instead of closeness. I forgive you for every birthday you missed, every achievement you dismissed, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough. You did your best with what you had, and what you had wasn't much because someone took it from you before you ever had a chance. But Mom, here's what I need you to understand. The cycle can break. Marcus is proof of that. I was raised without warmth, and somehow I found the capacity to love him with every cell in my body. I broke the cycle, Mom, and you can too. If you're reading this letter, it means I'm not there to help you do it. But Eleanor is. She's the strongest woman I've ever known, besides Rachel. And Marcus, God, Mom, Marcus is incredible. He sees the world in ways we can't even imagine. He's not broken. He's extraordinary. They're your family, Mom. Rachel's mother and your grandson. The family you pushed away because you were too scared to let them in. It's not too late. Find them. Not with lawyers or money or demands. Find them with humility. Show up at Eleanor's door and tell her you're sorry. Tell her you want to learn how to be a grandmother. Tell her you're ready to break the walls down even though it terrifies you. And then do the work. Day after day. Show up. Be present. Let Marcus teach you how to see the world differently. Let Eleanor teach you what 35 years of loving other people's children looks like. Let yourself feel things you've been afraid to feel your whole life. It will hurt, Mom. Growth always does. But on the other side of that pain is something you've never let yourself have. A family that loves you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are. I love you. I always did. Even when you made it hard. Even when I was angry. Even when I said goodbye and never called back. You were my mother, and I loved you. I just wish you had been able to let yourself love me back. It's not too late to love Marcus. Please don't waste this chance. Your son, James. Victoria read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving with sobs she had held inside for decades. James had understood. All along he had understood, and he had forgiven her. Even from beyond death, her son had found a way to offer her the grace she had never deserved. She looked at the phone sitting on the table. Eleanor's number was still there on the card the teacher had pressed into her hand. Victoria picked up the phone and started typing. Please, I need to explain. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me a chance. My son left me a letter. I need to show you what it says. She hit send before she could change her mind. The response didn't come for hours. Victoria sat in the darkness of her penthouse, watching the city lights flicker below, wondering if Eleanor would ever respond. Then, at 11:43 at night, her phone buzzed. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., my house. Come alone. No lawyers, no drivers, no games. Just you. Victoria read the message and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile and terrifying and completely unfamiliar, but real. She had one chance to make this right. One chance to honor her son's final wish. One chance to meet her grandson, not as the woman she had been, but as the woman she was trying to become, and she would not waste it. Victoria arrived at the Blue House on Acacia Street at exactly 9:47 in the morning. She had been sitting in the taxi for 13 minutes, unable to move, staring at the small home with its modest garden and worn wooden porch. This was where her grandson lived. This was the home that had given him warmth, while she sat alone in her penthouse, surrounded by things that meant nothing. The taxi driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've been here a while. You getting out or—" Victoria handed him $100 bill without looking. "Keep the change." She stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not literally, of course, but something inside her was tilting, reorienting itself toward an unfamiliar direction, toward vulnerability, toward the terrifying possibility of being seen for exactly who she was. She had dressed carefully that morning. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, no armor of wealth, just simple black pants and a cream-colored blouse she had bought years ago and never worn because it wasn't impressive enough. Today, she didn't want to impress anyone. She wanted to disappear into ordinariness, to show up as something other than the woman in that viral video. The walk from the sidewalk to the front door was perhaps 20 feet. It felt like 20 miles. Victoria raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Inside that house was a woman who had every right to slam the door in her face. A woman who had raised Victoria's grandson alone, while Victoria counted her money and nursed her wounds. A woman who had stood in that parking lot and spoken truth with more power than any boardroom speech Victoria had ever delivered. What could she possibly say? That would be enough. The door opened before she could knock. Eleanor stood in the doorway, wearing a simple purple dress and an expression Victoria couldn't read. Not anger, exactly. Not welcome, either. Something in between. Cautious. Guarded. Waiting. "You're early," Eleanor said. "I couldn't sleep. I've been driving around the neighborhood for an hour." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or recognition of a feeling she understood. "Come in." The house was small, but immaculate. Photographs covered every available surface. Images of a life Victoria had missed entirely. Rachel as a baby, a child, a teenager, a bride. James smiling in ways Victoria had never seen him smile. And Marcus at every age from newborn to now, his serious eyes and rare smiles documented with obvious love. Victoria stopped in front of a photograph of James holding Marcus on his first birthday. Father and son were both covered in cake frosting, laughing at something off camera. "I don't have any pictures of him like this," Victoria said quietly. "I don't have any pictures of him at all. That was his first birthday. Rachel made the cake from scratch. James insisted on letting Marcus dig into it with his hands." Eleanor's voice softened slightly. "He was a good father. The best I've ever seen. He was a good man, better than I deserved." Eleanor didn't disagree. "Sit down, Mrs. Ashford. I'll make coffee." "Victoria, please, Mrs. Ashford sounds like my mother and she was—" Victoria stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. "I know who your mother was. James told Rachel, and Rachel told me." Eleanor disappeared into the kitchen, her voice carrying through the doorway. "He told her about the nannies, about the distance, about a childhood that had everything except what mattered most." Victoria sank onto the couch, surrounded by evidence of the family she had rejected. "He talked about me. He talked about understanding you, about how you were hurt before you ever had a chance to learn what love looked like." Eleanor returned with 2 steaming mugs. James had a gift for seeing the wound behind the weapon. He saw it in his students, in the families he worked with, and he saw it in you. Victoria accepted the coffee with trembling hands. "The letter he wrote, did you know about it?" "Not until you mentioned it in your text. Marina called me yesterday to explain. She said James gave it to her 2 months before the accident, with instructions to deliver it if anything ever happened." Eleanor sat in the armchair across from Victoria. "She said she was angry at you for a long time. That's why she waited. But when she saw the video, saw you fall apart in that parking lot, she decided it was time. I read it 17 times last night." Victoria's voice cracked. "He forgave me. After everything I did, after I abandoned him and his family, he forgave me. That was who James was. Forgiveness came naturally to him." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. "But I'm not James, Victoria. Forgiveness doesn't come naturally to me. I've had to fight for every ounce of grace I've ever given. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I haven't earned it." "Then what are you asking for?" Victoria looked at the photographs surrounding her, the life that had continued beautifully without her participation, the love that had flourished in her absence. "A chance to learn how to be a grandmother. To know Marcus even though I've already missed so much. To prove that I can be different from who I was." She paused. "James said the cycle could break, that I could break it if I was brave enough to try." Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Victoria felt exposed, stripped of every defense she had spent 60 years constructing. "Marcus doesn't know you're coming," Eleanor finally said. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up, but he's in his room working on the building set we bought on his birthday. He's been at it for 3 days. He's very methodical. Would it be possible to meet him? Properly, I mean. Not like... Victoria couldn't bring herself to mention the parking lot. That depends on you. Marcus doesn't respond well to loud voices or sudden movements. He may not look you in the eyes, and that doesn't mean he's ignoring you. It means eye contact is difficult for him. He might ask questions that seem blunt or inappropriate, but he's not trying to be rude. He just says what he thinks. I understand. No, you don't. Not yet. Eleanor's voice was firm but not unkind. Understanding Marcus takes time. It takes patience. It takes the willingness to enter his world instead of forcing him into yours. I want to learn. I want to do whatever it takes. Eleanor set down her coffee cup and stood. Then follow me. But Victoria, if you raise your voice, if you make him uncomfortable, if you do anything that puts him in distress, this meeting is over, and there won't be another one. I understand. Eleanor led her down a short hallway covered in Marcus's artwork, drawings of buildings, bridges, cities that existed only in his imagination. Each one was meticulously detailed, every line precise, every angle perfect. He wants to be an architect, Eleanor said. He's been designing buildings since he was 6. His therapist says his spatial reasoning is off the charts. Victoria paused in front of a drawing labeled Home for Grandma. It showed a small house with a garden, a porch with a rocking chair, and 2 figures holding hands in front, one tall with curly grey hair, one small with serious eyes. That's you and him? He drew it last year for my birthday, said everyone deserves a home designed just for them. Victoria felt tears threatening again. She had cried more in the past 3 days than in the previous 30 years combined. He's remarkable. Yes, he is. They stopped in front of a door decorated with hand-drawn signs. Marcus's room, knock first, and quiet zone. No loud sounds, please. Eleanor knocked 3 times, evenly spaced. Marcus, there's someone here to see you. Can she come in? A pause. Then, is it the crying lady from the parking lot? Victoria flinched. Yes, sweetheart. She wants to meet you properly this time. No yelling, is that okay? Another pause. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her chest. Okay, but she has to take her shoes off. The floor is for socks only. Victoria immediately slipped off her shoes, leaving them neatly beside the door. Eleanor nodded approvingly and opened the door. The room was unlike any child's bedroom Victoria had ever seen. No mess, no chaos. Everything had its place. Shelves lined with books organized by color, bins labeled with precise categories, building blocks, red, building blocks, blue, drawing supplies, pencils, drawing supplies, markers. And in the center of the room, on a large table covered with a protective mat, was the most intricate building structure Victoria had ever seen. Towers and bridges and tiny houses, all connected in ways that seemed impossible. Marcus sat before his creation, carefully placing a piece he had been holding. 847 pieces, he said without turning around. I've used 722. I'm saving the special ones for the end. That's incredible, Marcus. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus turned then, and Victoria saw James's eyes looking at her from a 10-year-old face. The resemblance was so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Your voice is quieter than before, Marcus observed. That's good. Your loud voice made my ears feel like bees were inside them. I'm so sorry about that. I promise I won't be loud again. Marcus studied her, not her eyes, but her shoulder, her chin, the space just beside her head. Grandma Eleanor says you're my father's mother. That makes you my grandmother too, but you weren't there before. Why weren't you there? The question was direct, guileless, devastating. Victoria looked at Eleanor, who gave a small nod. Answer honestly, the nod seemed to say. He'll know if you lie. I was scared, Victoria said. When I found out you were different from other children, I got scared. And instead of being brave and learning about you, I ran away. It was wrong and I hurt your daddy very much. Marcus processed this information with visible concentration. Being different isn't bad. Grandma Eleanor says being different is like being a special edition, rare and valuable. Your Grandma Eleanor is very wise. She's the wisest person I know, except maybe for me about numbers. Marcus turned back to his building project. Did you know that 847 is the sum of 3 consecutive primes? 277 plus 281 plus 289. Victoria blinked. I didn't know that. Most people don't. Numbers tell me secrets they don't tell other people. He picked up another piece and examined it carefully. Do you want to help me build? I need someone to sort the remaining pieces by shape. I can show you the system. Victoria looked at Eleanor again, hope and fear battling in her chest. Go ahead, Eleanor said softly. I'll make more coffee. Victoria lowered herself to the floor beside the table, her joints protesting the unfamiliar position. She hadn't sat on a floor since she was a child herself, back when floors were for playing and the world was still full of possibility. These are the sorting categories, Marcus explained, pointing to a piece of paper with handwritten labels. Flat squares go here, flat rectangles go here, small connectors in this pile, large connectors in that pile. Do you understand? I think so. But you might need to correct me if I make mistakes. That's okay, everyone makes mistakes, even me sometimes. The important thing is learning from them. He paused. Grandma Eleanor taught me that. For the next hour, Victoria sorted building pieces while Marcus constructed his city. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his observations were precise and fascinating. He explained why certain shapes created stronger structures. He described the mathematical principles behind arch formation. He told her about famous architects whose work he admired and buildings he hoped to design someday. Victoria listened to everything, asking questions only when appropriate, learning to follow his lead rather than trying to direct the conversation. At some point, Eleanor appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee and watched them work in silence. Your sorting is good, Marcus said eventually, examining Victoria's organized piles. You have 94% accuracy. Most adults only get 70 to 80% on their first try. Thank you, Marcus, that means a lot to me. You're welcome. He placed another piece on his structure, then paused. My daddy used to help me build too, before he went to live in the sky. Victoria's heart clenched. Did he? He wasn't as good at sorting as you, only 82%. But he tried very hard, and that's what matters. Marcus looked at her shoulder. Are you going to come back? To help me build more? Victoria had to take a breath before she could answer. I would like that very much. If your Grandma Eleanor says it's okay. Marcus turned toward the doorway where Eleanor stood watching. Grandma Eleanor, can the crying lady come back? She has a name, sweetheart. Victoria. Can Victoria come back? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Victoria could feel her future hanging in that silence. We'll see how today goes, Eleanor finally said. If things continue like this, then yes, she can come back. Marcus nodded, satisfied with the answer. Then he reached into a small box beside him and pulled out a single building piece, a tiny golden connector that shimmered in the light. This is my favorite piece, he said, holding it up. I was saving it for the most important part of the city, but I want you to have it instead. Victoria stared at the small golden piece in his outstretched hand. Marcus, I can't take your favorite piece. It's okay, I have other favorites. And Grandma Eleanor says that gifts are how we show people they matter to us. He pressed the piece into her palm. You matter now because you came back. Victoria closed her fingers around the tiny golden connector and felt something break open inside her chest. Something that had been frozen for 60 years, cracking like ice in spring. Thank you, Marcus, she whispered. I'll treasure this forever. You're welcome. He turned back to his building project. Now I need to recalculate. 846 pieces remaining. Still the sum of two squares. 21 squared plus 23 squared. The math still works. Victoria looked at Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, the golden piece clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Eleanor nodded slowly. Something had shifted in her expression. Not quite acceptance, but the beginning of it. The crack in a door that had been closed for 3 years. Come back Saturday, Eleanor said. Marcus has therapy at 9, but he's free after 11. We can have lunch together. I'll be here, Victoria promised. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'll be here. As she left the little blue house an hour later, Victoria paused on the porch and looked back at the world she was only beginning to understand. A world where love wasn't a transaction, where forgiveness was possible, where a 10-year-old boy with a gift for numbers had just taught her more about grace than 60 years of life ever had. She opened her palm and looked at the golden piece. It was the smallest thing she had ever owned, and somehow it was worth more than everything she had lost. 6 months had passed since Victoria Ashford walked into Eleanor Mitchell's blue house on Acacia Street with nothing but a letter and a prayer. 6 months of Saturday visits that turned into Wednesday dinners. 6 months of learning how to sit on floors and sort building pieces by shape. 6 months of discovering that a 10-year-old boy who spoke in numbers and patterns had more wisdom in his little finger than Victoria had accumulated in 60 years of living. Everything had changed. Victoria sold the penthouse 3 months after that first visit. She couldn't stand the emptiness anymore. The marble floors that echoed with loneliness, the designer furniture that had never felt like home, the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out on a city she no longer recognized. She found a small apartment just 4 blocks from Eleanor's house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that could barely fit 2 people at once. The real estate agent had looked at her like she was insane when she signed the papers. "Mrs. Ashford, this property is, well, it's significantly below your usual standards." "My usual standards," Victoria had replied, "were the problem." The money from the penthouse sale went into 2 accounts, half for Marcus's education fund, managed by Eleanor with full control. The other half Victoria kept for living expenses, though she found she needed far less than she ever imagined. It turned out that happiness didn't have a price tag. It came free, in the form of Saturday morning pancakes and building projects that took weeks to complete. The lawyers Victoria had threatened to unleash on Eleanor were dismissed the day after she read James's letter. She called the firm herself, told them to close the file and apologized for wasting their time. The senior partner had been confused. Billable hours were billable hours after all, but Victoria didn't care. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Some battles, she was learning, had never been hers to fight in the first place. The board's decision to remove her from the company had stung at first. But as weeks turned into months, Victoria realized they had done her a favor. She had spent 40 years building an empire that meant nothing. Now she was building something that mattered, a relationship with her grandson, one careful brick at a time. On the morning of Victoria's 61st birthday, she woke to a text message from Eleanor. "Marcus has been counting down the days. He made you something. Come for breakfast." Victoria smiled at her phone, something she did often now. Smiling had become easier over the past 6 months. So had crying, laughing, feeling things she had spent decades trying to suppress. She dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a soft sweater, no labels, no pretense, and walked the 4 blocks to Eleanor's house. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, leaves just beginning to turn golden red on the old oak trees that lined Acacia Street. When she arrived, Marcus was already waiting at the door. "You're 3 minutes early," he announced. "I calculated your average walking speed from previous visits and predicted you would arrive at 8:47. It's 8:44. I walked a little faster today. I was excited to see you." Marcus considered this. Excitement increases average walking speed by approximately 12%. That explains the discrepancy. He stepped aside to let her in. "I made you a present. It took me 23 days to complete." The present was waiting on the kitchen table covered with a cloth napkin. Eleanor stood by the stove flipping pancakes, but her eyes were on Victoria's face as Marcus unveiled his creation. It was a building. Not just any building, a miniature replica of the house on Acacia Street, complete with the blue paint, the front porch, the rocking chair where Eleanor sat on summer evenings. But Marcus had added something that didn't exist in real life, a second small house connected to the first by a covered walkway. "This is Grandma Eleanor's house," Marcus explained, pointing to the larger structure. "And this is your house. I connected them, so you never have to walk in the rain when you come to visit. The walkway has exactly 47 support beams, because 47 is a prime number, and prime numbers are the strongest." Victoria's vision blurred with tears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small golden building piece Marcus had given her 6 months ago. She carried it everywhere now, a reminder of the moment everything changed. "I still have it," she whispered. "I've kept it with me every single day." Marcus's eyes widened slightly, a significant emotional response for him. "You kept it? For 183 days?" 183 days. I counted too. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus did something he had never done before. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Victoria's waist. The hug was brief and slightly awkward. Physical affection didn't come naturally to him, but it meant more than any embrace Victoria had ever received. "Happy birthday, Grandma Victoria." Grandma Victoria. He had never called her that before. Always Victoria or the crying lady in those early days. Never, Grandma. Eleanor turned away from the stove, but not before Victoria saw her wipe her eyes with the corner of her apron. After breakfast, pancakes shaped like buildings. Because Marcus had insisted, Eleanor suggested they go to the park. It was a tradition they had developed over the past few months. Saturday breakfast, followed by a walk through Riverside Park, where Marcus could study the architectural features of the old stone bridges, and Victoria could practice being present in a world that moved slower than she was used to. The park was moderately busy for a Saturday morning. Families spread blankets on the grass, children ran through the playground, joggers traced paths around the pond. Marcus walked between his two grandmothers, holding Eleanor's hand on his left and Victoria's on his right. "The noise level is acceptable," Marcus reported. 5.3 on my scale. We can stay for at least 45 minutes before I need a break." They found their usual bench near the old stone bridge Marcus loved, and he immediately began sketching in the notebook he always carried. Victoria watched him work, marveling at the precision of his lines, the way he captured structural details most adults would never notice. "He's been talking about architecture school," Eleanor said quietly, sitting beside Victoria while Marcus sketched. "Says he wants to design buildings that make people feel calm, buildings with the right proportions and the right light. He'll be brilliant at it. He's already brilliant at it." "He is." Eleanor paused. "You've been good for him, Victoria. I didn't think I'd ever say that, but it's true. He's more confident now, more willing to try new things. Having two grandmothers who show up for him, it matters." Victoria felt the familiar sting of tears. "I should have been here from the beginning. I wasted so much time." "You did, but you can't unlive the past. You can only choose what to do with today." Eleanor's hand found Victoria's and squeezed gently. "James was right about you. He always believed you could change. I didn't believe it until I saw it, but he knew. He was a better person than I deserved. Maybe. But he was your son. And he loved you anyway. Just like Marcus is starting to love you." Eleanor smiled. "That's what family does. We love each other through the mess." The peace of the moment shattered without warning. A group of teenagers nearby had brought a portable speaker, and someone cranked the volume to maximum. Heavy bass and screaming vocals exploded across the park, the sound waves hitting like physical blows. Victoria saw it happen in slow motion. Marcus dropped his notebook. His hands flew to his ears, his face contorted into an expression of pure anguish as the overwhelming noise invaded his carefully calibrated world. He squeezed Eleanor's hand. Once, twice, 3 times. The distress signal. But Eleanor was on his left side, and the bench made it difficult for her to move quickly. She tried to stand, tried to reach him, but her knee caught on the wooden slat, and she stumbled. Victoria moved on pure instinct. She was on her feet before she knew what she was doing, positioning herself between Marcus and the source of the sound, blocking as much of the noise as possible with her body. She dropped to her knees in front of him, exactly as she had seen Eleanor do 6 months ago in that parking lot. "I'm here, Marcus. Grandma Victoria is right here." Her voice was low and steady, barely above a whisper. "Let's breathe together, okay? In through your nose, hold it out through your mouth. That's perfect. Again, in, hold out." She pulled the soft sweater over her head. She was wearing a t-shirt underneath, and draped it over Marcus like a tent, creating a dark, enclosed space that blocked out the visual chaos, along with some of the sound. "You're safe," she continued, her voice never rising above that calm whisper. "The noise can't hurt you. It's just sound waves moving through air. They'll pass. Everything passes. I'm not going anywhere." Marcus was trembling violently, tears streaming down his face, but his breathing was starting to slow. His hands, still pressed against his ears, began to relax slightly. Eleanor had recovered from her stumble and was now crouched beside them, but she didn't intervene. She watched Victoria with an expression that shifted from surprise to something deeper, something that looked like recognition, like finally seeing proof of something she had hoped might be true. The teenagers with the speaker had noticed the commotion. One of them, a girl with purple hair and multiple earrings, walked over and turned the volume down to almost nothing. "Sorry," she said, looking genuinely concerned. "We didn't realize. Is he okay?" "He will be," Victoria said, not taking her eyes off Marcus. "Thank you for turning it down." The girl nodded and retreated to her friends, and Victoria could hear her explaining something about sensory sensitivities, about being more careful in public spaces. The next generation, learning compassion in real time. Under the sweater tent, Marcus's breathing had returned to normal. He lowered his hands from his ears and looked at Victoria, really looked at her, meeting her eyes for 3 full seconds before glancing away. "You remembered the breathing," he said softly, "and the quiet voice, and the dark space for my eyes. I've been learning. Your Grandma Eleanor taught me. She's a good teacher. That's why so many people gave her the car." Marcus paused. "You're a good learner. 94% accuracy on the sorting, and now this. That's above average." Victoria laughed through her tears, a wet, messy sound that she would have been mortified by a year ago. Now it just felt human. "Thank you, Marcus. That means everything to me." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was another building piece, this one silver instead of gold. "I was saving this for a special occasion," he said. "I think this is a special occasion. You protected me like Grandma Eleanor protects me. That makes you a real grandmother now. Not just a birthday grandmother or a Saturday grandmother. A real one." He pressed the silver piece into Victoria's palm, right next to the gold one she had pulled from her pocket during the crisis. 2 pieces, gold and silver. One for the moment she was accepted, one for the moment she proved she belonged. Victoria closed her fingers around them and felt something click into place inside her chest. A piece of herself she hadn't known was missing, finally finding its home. Eleanor helped them both to their feet. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "Well," she said, "I think that's enough excitement for one birthday. How about we go home and have some cake?" "Chocolate cake with chocolate frosting," Marcus specified. "I helped Grandma Eleanor make it yesterday. It has exactly 3 layers because 3 is the first odd prime number." "3 is perfect," Victoria said. They walked back to the blue house on Acacia Street, Marcus between his 2 grandmothers, holding both their hands. The autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet, and somewhere in the distance a church bell rang 11 times. At the front porch, Marcus stopped and looked at the 2 women who had chosen to love him despite everything that made him different. "Grandma Eleanor," he said, "do you remember what you told me about family after Mommy and Daddy went to live in the sky?" "I remember, sweetheart. You said family isn't just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who choose to stay." He looked at Victoria with those serious dark eyes. Grandma Victoria chose to stay, even when it was hard, even when everyone was angry at her. She kept coming back. Victoria knelt down so she was at eye level with her grandson. "I will always come back, Marcus, no matter what. That's a promise." Promises are important. They're like verbal contracts. Grandma Eleanor says you should never make a promise you can't keep. Then I'll keep this one. Every single day for the rest of my life. Marcus nodded, satisfied with the terms of the agreement. Then he turned to Eleanor. "Can we go inside now? The cake has been waiting for 4 hours and 37 minutes, and I want to see if Grandma Victoria cries when she sees the candles. She cries a lot now, but they're the good kind of tears, the healing kind." Eleanor laughed and opened the door. "Let's go find out." As they walked into the warm house that smelled like chocolate and love, Victoria felt the 2 small building pieces pressing against her palm. Gold and silver, beginning and proof. 2 tiny objects that represented everything she had gained by losing everything she thought she wanted. James had been right. The cycle could break. And standing in this small blue house, surrounded by a family she had almost destroyed and somehow been given anyway, Victoria finally understood what her son had tried to tell her all along. Wealth wasn't measured in dollars or properties or stock portfolios. Wealth was measured in Saturday mornings and building projects, in pancakes shaped like houses and birthday cakes with exactly 3 layers. In the small hand of a grandson who had every reason to reject her but chose to give her a silver piece instead. Family wasn't blood. Family was choice. And Victoria Ashford, former millionaire, former chairwoman, former prisoner of her own walls, had finally chosen right. Eleanor caught her eye across the kitchen and smiled. A real smile. A smile of acceptance. "Welcome to the family," Eleanor said softly. "For real this time." Victoria smiled back, tears streaming down her face, the good kind, the healing kind, and spoke the truest words she had ever said. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." And there, in a small kitchen in a blue house on Acacia Street, 3 generations of a family that had been broken and remade sat down together to eat chocolate cake and count their blessings. Because in the end, love wasn't about where you started, it was about where you chose to stay.